The National Desk, America's News, now.
Nice weather, beautiful day, but a very dangerous border. We're going to take care of it. Thank you.
Differing views of the border as the last two presidents visit Texas on the same day.
Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed over the course of this conflict, not just today, but over the past nearly 5 months.
Questions remain. What led to dozens dying, hundreds injured as Gazans seek basic aid to survive? And another blizzard is coming to California. Just how much snow the Sierras will get. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Right now, both President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump at the United States-Mexico border in different cities in Texas. Biden is in Brownsville, while Trump is with Texas Governor Greg Abbott in Eagle Pass, the two likely 2024 candidates using the backdrop to make a case for what they believe are the best border policies for America. The current president wants a bill from Congress to help the Border Patrol, while the former seeks stiffer actions from the states.
They desperately need more resources, need more agents, more officers, more judges, more equipment in order to secure our border.
If you look at Arizona, they haven't done anything there. Governor hasn't done a thing, and the governor in California hasn't done a thing. People are flowing through there like nothing, but Texas is very secure, and it's going to be even more secure by the time you finish, which will be soon.
And one of the measures the former president was referring to, a new Texas immigration law that allows state law enforcement to arrest people suspected of entering the country illegally. That was blocked today by a federal judge. The measure was set to take effect on March 5th. Governor Greg Abbott argues the law is needed to deter illegal crossings at the southern border. The judge, siding with the Biden administration, granting a preliminary injunction saying the measure would conflict with federal immigration law. Texas officials are expected to appeal. The devastating Smokehouse Creek wildfire is now the largest in Texas history, burning more than 1 million acres so far in the Panhandle and parts of Oklahoma. At least 2 people we know of have died, and the fire is only 3% contained. Multiple buildings have been destroyed, and firefighters are working to protect buildings that have not yet burned. One rancher who lost his land and livestock is already thinking about getting back to work.
Just waiting for the rains and hopefully some snow or something to kind of put some moisture back in the ground so we can get the process started again.
The fire started on Monday and quickly spread due to dry conditions and strong winds. It's not yet known what sparked it. Police are working to identify suspects in a deadly shooting in Orlando, Florida last night. 1 person was killed. At least 6 others were hurt after 2 groups of people started firing shots at each other. Police say it started as an argument about a car and when it was going to be returned. The 6 people who were injured are now in stable condition. In vitro fertilization is now one step closer to coming back to the state of Alabama. The state house passed new legislation 94-6, protecting IVF medical providers from civil or criminal lawsuits. Multiple Alabama hospitals and clinics recently paused their IVF treatments following the state Supreme Court's decision that frozen embryos are considered children. The bill now heads to the state Senate and could pass as early as tonight before heading to the desk of Governor Kay Ivey. Donald Trump will remain on the ballot for Illinois' presidential primary on March 19th for now. Today, Trump appealed yesterday's ruling that excluded him, and the judge then decided to keep the decision on hold until the appeal process is over. The case centers around the 14th Amendment and Trump's role in the January 6th, 2021 Capitol attack. We are also waiting on a ruling from the Supreme Court on that very same issue. Right now, the United Security Council is meeting to discuss reports out of northern Gaza, where dozens of Palestinians were killed as they waited for much-needed humanitarian aid. Health officials in Hamas-run Gaza have claimed that as many as 112 people died and more than 700 were injured as, quote, Israel massacred civilians. Eyewitnesses say stampedes broke out after IDF soldiers began shooting civilians who were waiting for food. Initially, there were allegations that tank and artillery fire was used on those crowds. The IDF released this video today of part of the incident, showing hundreds of Gazans rushing the aid trucks. In an official statement, the IDF said the vast majority of Palestinians were killed while trampling each other. The military did admit Israeli troops used live fire against civilians who swarmed aid vehicles at a different location. They confirmed 10 dead in that incident. Israel says there were no tanks, drones, artillery, or airstrikes used against any of the crowds. President Biden, however, responding, saying the U.S. is trying to verify what happened in that incident, but said the tragedy would certainly complicate the ongoing hostage ceasefire talks. While on Capitol Hill, progressive Democrats demanding a meeting with the president, reiterating a call for a full end to the war.
Despite the clarity surrounding Gaza's despair, the response from political leaders have been nothing short of callous inaction. We are demanding an immediate, lasting ceasefire and that the Israeli government commit to ceasing any plans to bombard and invade Rafah.
Today, President Biden did hold a call with the president of Egypt to discuss that tragedy and also the need for a negotiated deal. The White House says in terms of the deal, the leaders underscored that the release of hostages would result in an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza over a period of at least 6 weeks. New developments out of Boston. Jack Teixeira, the Air National Guardsman accused of leaking classified documents, is expected to plead guilty at a hearing on Monday. Federal prosecutors filed a motion today to set up that hearing, but exactly what charges Teixeira will plead to is not yet clear. The judge on Monday will determine whether to accept or deny that plea agreement. And there was some good and some bad in today's economic numbers. On the one hand, the annual increase in inflation is the smallest we've seen in 3 years. On the other hand, well, prices, they are still going up. And these numbers are showing more evidence that the Federal Reserve's path to bring down inflation isn't quite as smooth as many would like. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has more on what this means for you.
Inflation reports out this month reflecting bumps in the road on the way to relieving Americans of the painful burden of high inflation. The latest reading from the Commerce Department shows the inflation rate in January was lower than it was a year ago, but on a month-to-month basis was slightly higher.
What it is that prices in some areas are going up while prices in other areas are going down at the same time.
NerdWallet personal finance expert Sarah Rathner says more people are turning to credit cards to make ends meet, but it's a tricky time to rely on credit when interest rates raised by the Federal Reserve to fight inflation are so high.
We have heard that there is talk of interest rates eventually going down this year, but we just haven't seen that yet. And so everybody is waiting with bated breath.
Fed officials say they don't have enough confidence yet that inflation is on a sustained path toward their 2% target to start lowering rates. New York Fed President John Williams doesn't expect to hit that target until next year.
The risks to this forecast are two-sided. Inflation may surprise on the upside, or consumer strength, which has been a major driver of the robust growth we saw last year, may fade more quickly than I anticipate.
Another person who's keeping a close eye on those risks is J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon.
I just think it may not come down that quick and people may be surprised. So when people talk about, the market is kind of pricing a soft landing, that may very well happen. But, the odds at 70 or 80%, I would give them half of that. That's all.
Though the economy has a good chance of dodging a recession, individuals may feel something like a personal recession.
According to NerdWallet's annual household debt study, costs are up 20%, while median income is only up 12%. And that's looking at the last 4 years or 5 years since 2019.
Now, the Fed does meet again next month, but based on the popular CME FedWatch tool, a likely rate cut isn't predicted until June at the earliest.
And Natra, what are we hearing from the Fed in terms of what it means for the job market, how that all plays in?
Yeah, well, this is partly why the Fed's policy tightening can be so controversial, because the forces that bring inflation down are often the same forces that cause job losses. At the same time, the tight labor market we're experiencing is a big driver of inflation. So the current national unemployment rate is 3.7%. And this week, New York Fed President John Williams, who you heard a bit from there, says that as inflation comes down, he's expecting unemployment to peak at 4%. But, Amira, that would still be historically low.
Wow. All right. Atrell Nashar, thank you, as always, live in Washington, D.C. for us. And coming up, a new winter storm developing in the west, where up to 12 feet of snow are forecast for this weekend. Then Defense Secretary Austin testifying today about his secret hospitalization, what he said, and how lawmakers from both parties are reacting. And later, millions of people could be at risk for the degenerative brain disease CTE, even if they don't play sports. The group that's especially at risk. Right after this. Well, up to 12 feet of snow could fall in California's Sierra Nevada mountains by Sunday. Heavy snow is already starting to accumulate as a new winter storm moves into the area. Dangerous avalanches are possible from tomorrow morning to Saturday night. Damaging wind also forecast for much of the west tonight, with gusts over 55 miles per hour and 75 miles per hour in higher elevations. Well, we are avoiding a partial government shutdown. The House passed a one-week stopgap measure today, and the Senate is expected to do the same. If signed by President Biden tomorrow, it'll push off the partial government shutdown by just about a week. Both chambers of Congress are working on regular order spending bills that would have a much longer and lasting impact. Let's hope they can achieve that. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin went before the House today to explain why his hospitalization in December and January for a prostate cancer diagnosis was kept secret from the White House and Congress for days.
Again, we did not handle this right, and I did not handle it right. As you know, I've apologized, including directly to the president, and I take full responsibility.
But the secretary believes he was never AWOL, maintains there were never lapses in authorities or in command and control. Members of both parties seemed to take issue with his explanation while rebuking how Austin handled the situation.
It's totally unacceptable that it took 3 days to inform the President of the United States that the Secretary of Defense was in the hospital and not in control of the Pentagon.
I think the lack of transparency and clear communication about what was going on with the DOD, certainly with the White House, but also, with Congress and others, should not be repeated.
Well, in recent weeks, it has brought a renewed focus, not just on the sheer number of migrants in our country, but on the crime that some of them have committed. While the vast majority come here for a better life, some are breaking the law and then still being allowed to remain, not behind bars, but free in our communities. Here's national correspondent Christine Brazow.
She was devoted to making this world a better place, and we have no doubt that she would have been an incredible nurse.
The horrific murder of 22-year-old Laken Riley, a nursing student out for a run last week on the University of Georgia campus, has thrust sanctuary policies back into the spotlight. The chief suspect, Jose Ibarra, was arrested for entering the country illegally in 2022 and then released on parole, only to be arrested again in 2023 for endangering a child. But that arrest occurred in New York City, deemed a sanctuary city.
What that means is that the local law enforcement will not cooperate with immigration authorities regarding someone they arrested for a local or state crime.
Instead, he was released, later moving to Athens, Georgia, where the murder occurred, and which did not have sanctuary laws in place.
No policies have been adopted by the mayor and commission that have created sanctuary city status in Athens.
Still, things got heated at a public meeting this week. The Athens mayor, a target.
You're insulting our intelligence, sir. You need to resign.
Anger boiling over around the country as local budgets are strained and resources tapped out, including in New York.
A lot of money is being spent to house people, to make sure they're not in the streets and try to get them jobs. It's taken its toll on our state. We're at capacity.
The city of Denver, which has already scaled back services at the DMV and city parks, just announced it will close 4 migrant shelters to save the city $60 million.
That still leaves us $120 million of cuts to make, so that still means we have work to do.
Both President Joe Biden and his likely 2024 rival spent the day at the southern border with some very different messages. Former President Trump for months has highlighted the detrimental impact of the border crisis on the entire country. President Biden, meanwhile, says a fix was in place with the bipartisan border legislation that Trump effectively killed when he urged Republicans to vote against it. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National Desk.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is stepping up his threats against Western countries, warning that sending troops to Ukraine could risk global nuclear war. He spoke at his annual State of the Nation address ahead of a presidential election next month that he is sure to win. Putin was apparently referencing French President Emmanuel Macron's recent statement that deployment of Western ground troops to Ukraine should not be ruled out. The leader says Russia's nuclear forces are in full readiness. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
We've got a small congregation, but people that are faithful and are been working with me all the time, same ones since I opened the doors.
Moore got a call around 5 this morning from a member of his congregation telling him the church was in bad shape.
This is devastation to know that it's a bad call to get at 5 o'clock in the morning, that your church is tore up.
The EF2 tornado took the roof off of the church, leaving everything inside exposed to the rain and wind. Moore is hoping the insurance he has will help replace not only the parts of the building that are no longer there, but also what's inside. But while he surveys the damage to the building, he's just grateful it wasn't worse.
First thing I told him, I said, the building could be replaced, but lives can't.
There's something going on mental health-wise because it wasn't normal.
Tuesday morning, one neighborhood in northwest Fresno had a dangerous wake-up call as a man with a big knife started bashing in car windows around 9:30.
15 years, I understand like that here.
Jesse Mendez, who lives in the area, says he heard a loud pop and thought someone was taking apart a wooden pallet. When he came out, he quickly realized that was not happening. A man in his underwear was on top of a car, the car in his driveway.
He continued to kick it until the windshield broke on the front windshield. Then he got on the back, he stood on the hood, the roof, and he had a meat cleaver, a machete, good-sized knife. He was hitting the windows, breaking all the passenger windows, side windows.
Officers shot the man multiple times with less than lethal beanbags, but that didn't seem to work. Multiple officers took the man to the ground, but he continued to fight, banging up several officers and even biting one several times.
We are at a critical point in this state's history, and the public safety of the people of this state.
State lawmakers are considering more changes for Washington state's pursuit laws that currently only allow officers to chase suspects involved in serious violent crimes like domestic violence, DUI, and sex crimes. Initiative 2113 expands that to allow officers to chase if they have a reasonable suspicion a person has violated the law or committed any crime, while also considering if the person poses a threat to the safety of others, and failing to catch them would be a greater safety risk than the risks involved in a chase. Supporters of these changes hope to put a stop to some unintended consequences from the initial pursuit law that passed in 2021.
We have to change that environment where people feel emboldened and empowered and as if there's no consequence to running from the police.
Coming up, the brain condition CTE is known for its devastating impacts on football players, but it can also affect domestic violence victims. How widespread, one expert says the risk could be. CTE, a degenerative and often deadly brain disease, is widely known for its catastrophic and sometimes deadly effects on football players and other athletes. But some experts say there might be millions of domestic violence victims at risk as well. Tonight, Spotlight on America's Dwayne Pullman travels to Los Angeles for an exclusive interview with one of those experts, a woman whose mother was among the very first cases to connect CTE to violence at home.
Sadness ripples through the smile in these photos of a woman who died from traumatic brain injuries.
You saw your mother beaten repeatedly.
All my life.
Domestic violence delivered for decades, Maria Garay Serratos says, by her father.
Pushing, shoving, strangling, choking, the head against the car.
Maria's mother bore scars and battled debilitating headaches. After nearly 40 years of abuse, Maria finally convinced her mother to escape.
So you got her away from him?
I had to get her away.
It was too late.
The profound dementia that just started hitting her was very sad to see.
Were you watching your mother die?
Absolutely.
Doctors diagnosed Alzheimer's. Maria, who has a PhD and master's in social work, suspected chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, a degenerative and often deadly brain disease that afflicts football players, other athletes, and members of the military who suffer repeated blows to their heads. But a CTE diagnosis can only be confirmed by dissecting the brain after death.
Could it be described as a silent killer?
Absolutely.
Maria believes the number of CTE cases in domestic violence victims is in the tens of millions.
A silent and ignored, unrecognized pandemic.
Maria's mother passed away in 2015. Maria donated her brain to search for signs of CTE. 3.5 years later, Dr. Ann McKee, a pioneer in the study of CTE and director of the Unite Brain Bank in Boston, finally gave Maria answers. In the documentary, This Hits Home, Dr. McKee delivered the news to Maria for the very first time.
Her brain was just being ruined by those injuries.
In addition to massive brain damage and onset of Alzheimer's, Dr. McKee confirmed Maria's mother also suffered from CTE. It made headlines, the first public case of CTE linked to domestic violence. In an interview at the Brain Bank, Dr. McKee told me more study is needed.
Would you like to study that if you were given the ability to get the brains of these
Absolutely.
victims?
Maria founded a nonprofit named for her mother, now focused on a search for a silent killer in violent relationships around the world.
My mission is to create a global movement around the issue of domestic violence and head trauma and CTE.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Dwayne Pullman.
No stopping Iowa b-ball star Caitlin Clark at last night's sold-out Minnesota Arena. Clark broke another record. Tonight she stands as the highest-scoring college women's basketball athlete of all time, officially surpassing Lynette Woodard of Kansas, who held it for decades.
I wouldn't have the opportunity to be able to do what I'm doing every single night if it wasn't for people like her. And obviously there's so many great players across the board. So I'm just really thankful and grateful to have those people that have come before me.
And Clark is now on pace to pass Pistol Pete Maravich's scoring record. She's just 18 points shy of it, and she'll do it on Sunday night against Ohio State, and all eyes will be watching, that's for sure. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful Thursday night.